Okay. There we go. All right, you're on the air.
Okay. Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. Tonight, you've got Alex Philippidis of White Plains, New York, USA, the new senior business editor at Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News and Clinical Omics at Murray.
Mary Ann Liebert, it is.
Okay, let's take two.
Okay, and all right, let me count down then.
Okay.
And in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're on.
Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. Tonight, you've got Alex Philippidis of White Plains, New York, USA, the new senior business editor at Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News and Clinical Omics, a journalist specializing in biopharma, the industry of the hour. Alex joined Mary Ann Liebert of New Rochelle in 2011 from the Westchester Business Journal, where he was editor, and prior to that, a reporter for Gannett. And he is also here because he started White Plains Week with me and Jim Beneroff 20 years ago this month. More reminiscing later. But great to see you again, Alex.
Thank you.
The miracle of Zoom.
Yeah, howdy, John. It's good to be here, although very different from when we started out 2 decades ago.
Very
in
different.
the studio.
Very
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, Alex, could you give us a snapshot of where the coronavirus vaccines are this week?
Sure. Here's where things stand. There are a couple of approved vaccines, the Pfizer and BioNTech Comirnaty, or BNT162b2. That's an RNA-based vaccine. Moderna with its RNA-based vaccine called mRNA-1273. Those have been fully approved and should be being dosed to patients. Also approved is an antiviral drug that Gilead Sciences repositioned to treat COVID called Veklury, or remdesivir. That became technically the first drug or vaccine to win full FDA approval back in the fall. And there are also approved vaccines in Russia, the Sputnik 5. China, a few days earlier, actually last week, approved their first homegrown vaccine, state-owned Sinopharm, got conditional approval. Now, close to approval, but already in being dosed in patients in England, is AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford's AZD1222. And that uses a viral vector based on a weakened, meaning it's not able to replicate, version of a common cold virus that caused infections in chimps. 2 other antibody treatments are not fully approved, but authorized for emergency use in patients. And that's Regeneron's antibody cocktail and Lilly's bamlanivimab. So those are at least have reached some sort of finish line so far, with a few others on a lead lap, which I would be expecting to see approved this year at some point.
Yes. How did the companies develop the vaccines apparently quickly?
Well, both Moderna and BioNTech had been working on RNA-based vaccines for, I'd say, 3 to 5 years for different infectious diseases. When COVID-19 came along a year ago, they pivoted those programs toward treating COVID-19, since they'd be able to get fast money for development as well as meet a need in patients. And thus help themselves as well as patients. So that's why. In the case of AstraZeneca, they were invited along, given their big pharma experience, to join the University of Oxford, which had been uh, developing its own vaccine for COVID-19, stretching back to at least the winter. But yeah, the speed of development has been astonishing, because for a long time it's been a rule of thumb that it takes roughly a decade plus or minus. The one exception was Ebola drugs took about 4 years, 5 years, and that was considered pretty speedy. The pace of development has been measured in months rather than years. And while I don't see all future drugs being this quick, because again, you have the pandemic, and that has really prompted governments and other funders to step up and work quickly. Uh, I don't foresee in the future seeing drugs and vaccines all taking 10 to 12 years anymore. There's simply just a lot of time, and uh, companies can move fairly quickly.
Did the companies have access to China experiences with controlling the coronavirus, or was this from scratch development?
Hmm. Um, in the case of Pfizer and BioNTech, they brought on board a partner to oversee their vaccine in China, and that's Fosun Pharma. In the case of AstraZeneca, they have extensive experience in China. They had announced, for example, at the end of 2019, they'd have a global R&D center in Shanghai, an artificial intelligence innovation center also in Shanghai, and a fund to support domestic companies and partners in China, with AstraZeneca partnering with one of China's top investment banks toward $1 billion. And among the companies being supported are those in WuXi's International Life Sci Innovation Campus and elsewhere in China. So AstraZeneca has had quite a footprint in China. I'm not sure from Moderna's standpoint what their Chinese involvement was, but in part, Pfizer has a presence in China, but the fact that they felt compelled to draw on a homegrown company tells me that they felt they needed more of an edge in that market.
Mm-hmm. I see. Now, what is the pace of the New York State vaccine distribution? Is it running efficiently, to your knowledge, compared to the national logistics of getting the vaccines out?
Well, just yesterday, meaning Monday, Governor Cuomo had said that only 46% of the vaccine doses transported to New York State had been dosed into patients, with widely differing percentages from hospital and healthcare provider to others. In our region, for example, New York Presbyterian was among those with the higher percentages, one of the highest, as I recall, with Westchester Medical Center and the Montefiore system being lower percentages. The Med Center in Montefiore had not commented when contacted by News 12 about that. So I think it remains a question what the challenges are for them. Now, some we can figure out. I mean, for one thing, it's been the misfortune of this rollout that it happened just before Christmas holiday, because that's a time of year that a lot of employers, not just hospitals, have employees out taking their vacations at the end of the year, others taking time they're afraid of losing if they don't take off work. And so that didn't help.
Let's hope that was not the case.
Yeah. So without real explanation, it's hard to know, but that's one possible answer, that it could just looking at the calendar.
Yeah, could be. But hey, and I echo your experience. I contacted the medical center this morning before we started doing this interview, and they haven't gotten back to me yet with questions just like that.
Hmm.
So I don't think they will. We'll see, but they need to say something, you know.
Well,
As,
I
as
mean, there are challenges, no doubt. There's one of training because many of these vaccines require well, the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine requires storage at -70 Celsius. So you're talking roughly -100 on a Fahrenheit scale.
yeah,
So that requires special handling.
well, they
Um,
should say that. They should say that,
yeah,
you know.
Moderna's less so, and in fact, Moderna had trumpeted in December that they're able to store it at temperatures a little bit closer to at least freezer, if not refrigerator. So there, it's an issue, and those vaccines that are able to be stored and used more broadly are going to be ones that over time, I think, are going to be just because healthcare providers and hospitals aren't going to want to take the extra steps when they don't have to. But we have to wait till more of those vaccines become available.
Right. Now, what about the people who get COVID now? Are the drugs developed to cope with working from your knowledge? Are there enough of that?
The vaccines are meant for healthy people to prevent infection with
Mhm.
COVID-19, although one of the most important challenges is an open question, and that is how long will the immunity last in healthy people who receive the vaccine? The vaccines have been developed only within the past year. We know that they'll last up till 6 months because that's
Yeah.
the longest time frame studied as of yet. But will want to see, gee, will this last a year, a couple of years longer? And that's an open question. Now, for patients who have the virus, they're usually treated with other drugs, and those can vary. I'm thinking back when President Trump was treated for COVID back in the fall. He was given remdesivir or Veklury, that's the Gilead antiviral drug. He was also given Regeneron's antibody cocktail. That's two antibodies. And that was, oddly enough, at the time, it was the recommended dose, but his dosage turned out to be higher than what was authorized when the FDA granted emergency authorization. And the reason Regeneron gave is because as they studied it, they didn't see that big of a benefit with a higher dose. But be that as it may, these drugs appear to have worked on the president, although he did take dexamethasone, he did take zinc, he did take vitamin D, so there were a lot of other things. Now, the challenge for the antibody treatments is that they work better on mild to moderate cases of COVID-19 than on severe. However, there is at least one company that I interviewed back in the fall that's been working on antibodies for severe COVID-19 patients, and that's Humanigen. Humanigen's an interesting company because under its old name of Calobios, it had been bought at one point by Martin Shkreli. He got arrested, the pharma bro. Now, none of the charges of Shkreli relate to that company, but the taint of being owned and run briefly by Shkreli pushed the company into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, from which it was reorganized. The current CEO of Humanigen led a group of investors in taking the company from Chapter 11 and basically getting it back on the right path with a set of engineered or humaneered, as they call it, antibodies. They're designed to prevent and treat cytokine storm, which is one of the heavy effects of COVID. Now, the company has gotten the attention of the NIH's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. That's NIAID. That's the agency that Anthony Fauci runs. And the Linzilumab, which is the Humanigen's antibody, is one of 5 drugs that's under study in what's called the Big Effect Trial, or BET, and that's assessing those 5 drugs and some combinations, such as the combo of linzilimab and Gilead's Veklury, or remdesivir. And so we'll be waiting to see how that trial comes. And because of the antibodies focus on severe COVID, that's what drew the attention of NIAID and drew my attention and Jen's. We wrote about the company.
Now, how are these drugs doing in getting out to the hospitals, the hundreds of hospitals, thousands that need them to treat people with COVID? How are they getting out there?
The rollout has been slower than projected. Okay, at one point, the federal government was saying by the end of 2020, they were expecting 20 million doses to be administered. The actual number is closer to 4.2 million as of the end of the year. And so again, holiday
Is that
just
enough?
one reason. No, it's not. And it's acknowledged across the board that more doses need to be produced, distributed, and especially given to people. One open question, and we don't have an answer to this, is to what extent is the rollout being slowed down by the priority patients, like the healthcare workers, declining to get vaccinated? You hear anecdotal cases in many instances, whether on social media or in the news of that, but whether it's significant enough to dent the rollout, I don't think we really have an answer to, but it's something that I'd be watching. So by comparison, Israel's been able to vaccinate 10% of its population. Again, much smaller country. So even in England, there's been complaining publicly that the rollout there has been slower. And in England's case, they have another vaccine approved, homegrown AstraZeneca's vaccine with the University of Oxford, which is approved over there. So that's something that's going to have to step up. And you've seen now at least the politicians make that point of, gee, it's time, now it's time to sprint, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said Monday, for example. And there's talk of opening up vaccine hubs. Not sure how many people are going to come in off the street at 3 a.m. For a dose. At the very least, the late hours should dispel what have been cases in other states where there have been very long lines of people and vaccines
Florida,
running
for
out.
example.
Florida, yeah. And that was at Daytona Stadium, as I recall. So, so that's going to be quite. The other is manufacturing. The companies are going to have to step up. Now, Moderna, as of Tuesday morning, announced that they will increase from a minimum of 500 million to a minimum of 600 million, the number of doses they say they're going to produce this year. They had with a goal for the company of 1 billion with a B doses, but at the very least, they say they're going to produce 600 million. Other companies are going to need to do the same thing, but other governments are going to have to step up and pay for those doses until those are more widely circulated and you start seeing the providers stepping up.
Yeah, will the developers of the vaccine eventually realize a return on their investment?
I think they will. It will take longer than planned, but actually a couple of interesting numbers on that point. For some of the approved vaccines, the projected sales run into the billions of dollars. SVB Leerink had a projection in November that for the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, they projected a mere pittance of $258 million in 2020, but increasing to $4.6 billion worldwide in 2021. Moderna's vaccine is projected to generate more than $5 billion this year. Now, so companies have varied very widely on the pricing per dose. Moderna has one of the higher prices per dose, between $32 and $37 a dose. Pfizer's vaccine is in the middle at $19.50 a dose. AstraZeneca coming in the cheapest at $3 to $4 a dose, because their CEO had committed to selling the vaccine at cost, but for the duration of the pandemic. Once that ends, we'll have to see.
The consumer does not pay for it. It's free to people wanting to be vaccinated, right?
Yeah, but that gets paid somewhere along the line, whether it's
Somewhere
government
along the line.
supplying,
So,
whether it's government supplying to it, whether the institutions eventually start purchasing. So that's why those figures are watched, but also the companies have invested their own millions in many cases, although the US and European Union have stepped in with billions of dollars for many of the leading candidates as well. So at some point, at least the EU and the US are going to want to see some money from that back, and certainly the companies that developed the vaccine.
yes, certainly. Now, turning to the big picture down the road, what do you see as a future of big pharma pricing? Is there any will on the national level to limit price stability and affordability?
So far, pricing has been like the weather. Everybody talks about it, but you don't see much in the way being done. You've seen President Trump, really from the time he started campaigning, from time to time, weighing in and jawboning about high drug prices. Certainly, you've seen Democrats jawbone about high drug prices. You haven't seen a consensus in how to attack the problem. And even if you ever did, you would definitely see opposition from the biopharma industry, because what industry wants to see its prices curbed for product? And also, the industry is among those that actually has friends on both sides of the proverbial aisle in Congress. Despite the wide divisions between the parties on many of the issues, the industry has benefited in one big way, and that's been increased funding for basic research. That's because, people want to see this or that disease being treated, and they don't want to look like they're standing in the way of that kind of progress. But as for the price of drugs and seeing some relief from that, I don't see anything really soon.
Mm-hmm. What are the key issues facing big pharma today, other than the vaccine, of course?
Right. It's, as with many businesses, it's figuring out how to position themselves in the market, how to identify what diseases, what areas they want to specialize in, and then how to attack that, whether to do their own R&D, whether to partner with smaller companies, which is increasingly how the larger biopharmas have operated over the last decade. And from there, how quickly they're able to roll out product and expand their operations to be able to get that to patients. Also, you have newer modalities of drugs developed, specifically cell therapies and gene therapies. Those have the challenge of even higher prices for treatments than what we've seen with whether it's your basic small molecule created in the lab, or your basic biologic drug. One gene therapy, Zolgensma, for a form of spinal muscular atrophy in young children, Novartis marketed, had made headlines more than a year ago with a list price of $2 million per a treatment course. Now, the companies will insist that patients can access, whether it's funding programs or benefits so that the cost to them would be far less than those list prices. But those are very sobering, and that, if nothing else, creates an industry interest in seeing some sort of answer to pricing a product.
Mhm. Now, what are the new trends in drug and research you see ahead?
I mentioned cell and gene therapy because you're seeing it move beyond your basic rare diseases, where it would be like a single gene would be not working well and would need to be replaced with a viral vector, for example. You're seeing cellular therapies that are succeeding, and those modes are going to claim bigger percentages of drugs in development, as well as those that are out on the market over time. But there's still going to be a place for the antibodies, and even for the small molecule drugs that have been the traditional form. Also, you would see the companies looking to harness artificial intelligence in trying to figure out what antibody would work best and seeing their effect in patients. And that's going to take time, but it's already started.
Mhm. Okay, now we've been talking with Alex Philippidis of the Senior Business Editor of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News and Clinical Omics. And Alex, we started out talking mostly about COVID, and can you look at your crystal ball for us? What does COVID treatment have to achieve over the next 6 or 7 months for the vaccines to be effective and this epidemic to be stopped?
We hear a lot about achieving herd immunity, or a large percentage of the population that is protected from the virus. And there's been some fear about that in recent days because of the new variants of the virus that have been detected. Again, they increase the prospect of infection, although supposedly they're not any deadlier. But it's definitely led to increases in the caseload. So, well, that'll have to be watched. Now, the developers of the leading vaccines have been saying that their vaccines will be able to protect against those variants. We'll have to see over time how that works out. But it's getting a significant portion of population protected with these, as well as over time those that have the virus to be treated with antivirals. And one of the scariest prospects is that for some patients with this, you see breathing problems that last well beyond just a few days. And also anecdotal cases of memory loss and wooziness that you're going to need to study and address ultimately. And that's as scary as protecting yourself, even scarier than just protecting yourself from it if you're healthy.
You're right. Now, as far as getting the drugs to treat symptoms of people that already have the COVID, is my understanding that those have to be requested by hospitals?
If they're emergency use authorization drugs, yes, those have to be requested, but should be, as opposed to those that have won full approval, like the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, like Moderna, which
you
those
see a
have been.
problem with that? Do you see a problem with that?
If shortages or an inability to produce the drugs in significant numbers, then there would be the problem. If your hospital turns around and says, sorry, you'll have to wait a while, that's not good. That's not good.
That is not good. Well, Alex Philippidis, the Senior Business Editor of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News and Clinical Omics of the Marie Lambert organization in Westchester County. You have been heard on a vital topic to us all. Thank you for your insightful commentaries and prescience looking ahead. Alex, thank you. You have been heard. And this is John Bailey saying good night for people to be heard.
Very good. And counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll stop recording.